Dr. Anwar, dear friends, first of all, let me say it's wonderful to be back in the UAE and Manoj, particularly at this event, which I know you have done so much to build up. I understand that I have to briefly describe the state of the world so that we can then set up an interesting conversation with Dr. Anwar. So let me share my thoughts both about how the world looks to us, as well as where the relationship with the UAE fits into in that world. If I were to pick the key concepts which define the world today, uh, probably I'll settle for about 3 or 4. Obviously, the first would be globalization, the impact of globalization on the world. 2, I would speak about rebalancing. Rebalancing meaning that the weight of different nations and different regions in the world have changed in the last many decades. And a lot of that derives from globalization. Some of it is autonomous of globalization. And so when you think today of which are the crucial regions, which are the important countries, rebalancing tells you that they're not the same or not the same to the same extent as before. As rebalancing advances, I would pick a third concept, multipolarity, which is that some nations and maybe some groupings have acquired that much importance and influence that they're regarded in the international system as one of the poles. And the number of poles from an era 75 years ago where we thought in binary terms of the US and the USSR or the West and the East, today you actually have more independent or autonomous centers of decision making. So the more rebalancing.
We value cultural diversity, and I think only through this sort of process are we able to continue the communication that's important in between countries. I think we do share a lot of values as as human beings living in this globe, but at the same time we also have various also cultural traits and cultural diversity that makes this world such an interesting place. So I think it is extremely important as we move forward not to superimpose values that are perhaps suitable for certain societies, and we're all fine with that.
Give me an example about what you mean.
I think in various things. I think a lot of values about, for example, dividing the world into democratic states and authoritarian states. I think this is a binary view that just doesn't work, because really there are so many shades of gray between this end of the spectrum and that end of spectrum. I think if you accept the concept of respecting diversity, then really that acceptance of diversity really cascades down to everything that you look into. So it's not a single example here, but really it's a call for the world not to look at issues and look at areas of interest in a binary view.
Interesting. We seem to be entering this new era of globalization, where at the moment it feels like bilateral relations are taking precedence over potential multilateral.
Let me put it this way. You know, we saw a certain kind of globalization acquire a great deal of momentum, uh, probably from the mid 90s till about 5 years ago, 7 years ago. A lot of it was propelled economically. It was facilitated by technology, very driven by investment. But it also created exactly the point which Dr. Anwar mentioned, a kind of globalization ideology. Ideology that there is one globalization and there's one truth, one narrative, and a certain narrow set of people who will define what is right and what is wrong. And what happened was very interesting. Within societies, because globalization produced inequalities within societies. For example, you saw even in the United States, there was a hollowing out of the industrial economy. It created a backlash. It also created problems between societies. So you've had actually a very interesting phenomena, I would say, uh, certainly argumentation in the world about globalization. I think it's right now, one of the most important debates. And, when I spoke initially about rebalancing, we've seen political rebalancing. Many more states express political views. We've seen economic rebalancing. The GDP's share of global economy has changed. But to my mind, one of the toughest, disputations we are now entering is really cultural rebalancing, which is who gets to define what is right and what is wrong, what is normal and what is not, what is correct and what is not. And I think today that's a very, very big issue in international relations.
Interesting. Dr. Anwar, I'd love you to give your view on this idea of bilateral relations versus a multilateral approach. Do you see that?
Well, again, I think we can speak about, and this is also perhaps, a reductionism, so to speak. But we can speak about bilateralism, multilateralism, or we can speak also about a smaller multilateralism, which is also proving very effective today. I think bilateral relations usually are easier to manage or more difficult to manage, depending the trajectory that you are actually going on. But I think they are usually much more effective, of course. But they're not a replacement for multilateralism because there are many issues. And I think climate is a good example where it just cannot be dealt with bilaterally. But I think more and more, and I think here in things that we are doing with India, you can see that in some of the smaller relationships, and then you see this in the I2U2 as an example, you have the potential of agility and at the same time of effectiveness, because you are not trying to move 30 states or 50 states or whatever, but you have more or less a much smaller number of states that have a certain common interest in a certain area. So I think every successful foreign policy has to work on all these different levels, because each level actually has its pros and cons.
If I could just add to that, I mean, if I take India and UAE, I mean, we have to do our CPA. So it's a kind of today, there's so many issues and so many variables and so many platforms. The truthful answer to your question is kind of all of the above. You've got to work every opportunity and every platform to get the best results.
Well, let's take one of these examples and let's look in particular at COP27, finished recently. I'd love to hear directly what went right and what could have gone better.
We are looking at each other. I will yield to my host as a matter of courtesy.
Okay.
As the host of the next
Well,
COP.
I think, again, I look at it not as an expert in climate change. I look at it more from a political, let's say, perspective. So I think COP, I think the main thing was really the framework of addressing concerns of developing nations. Of course, we still have to put all the details and the working mechanism in place. I would say that this is the big breakthrough there. But on the other hand, of course, we know that we are slipping on commitments that were made in Paris. And I think this is something that we do really need to work diligently together in order to address that. So I wouldn't say that something went wrong, but I think that the international system is not as effective and as quick as it should be in addressing what we are really seeing, the effects and the ravages of climate as we move forward. But definitely, I think also what is extremely important, and especially from the perspective of a country like the UAE, which is quite bullish and working very hard on sustainable energy, but is at the same time a hydrocarbon economy. This realization that the transition is not going to happen overnight and will also need for everybody to understand that it will need a parallel hydrocarbon support for countries like India and like us and other countries that still need to develop their economies, address societal requirements in education and in housing and in infrastructure, etc. So I think the big takeaway has definitely been addressing the concern of support for developing economies, but we do need to move much faster.
If I could add to it, uh, and it's not COP27. I think whatever challenges precede COP27, they will carry on beyond COP27. There are two parts to it, really. One is the climate action part, which is, do you have the capabilities and the deployabilities and the efficiencies and the economies really to put in place a set of, uh, you can say, options out there or practices out there so that our growth is greener. My sense is that's much more about global business, about public policy, about sharing, etc. There's the other part, which is the tougher part, which is climate justice. And the climate justice part is that the promises which have been made to the developing world, uh, essentially, it's like those who are occupying carbon space have kept promising that they would help others. And frankly, they've kept shortchanging the world. And they come up every COP with some new argument, some evasion, something which keeps kicking the can down the road. So the real problem you're facing today is that of the rest of the world. But yet you'll say, well, they're a big emitter, so maybe they should step forward. Hello, this was not the country which occupied the carbon space. So somewhere people need to, be truthful about it and say, who's really responsible for the global warming, and the countries which need to step up.
I can hear an element of frustration in your voice as you
I
speak.
thought it was an element of truth, but I'm prepared to settle for your word.
So what should we be doing differently? And how can we move forward? Because as you say, it's happened year after year, COP after COP.
Well, look, the fact is, if on the one hand we truly believe this is existential, how can you say it is existential and I don't have the money to deal with it? Either it's existential and you put everything you have, or it's not. And you're actually sort of, as I say, you're not really willing to walk the talk. Now, the fact is, there have been other situations where countries have been willing to put up money. So it's not like there isn't the resources. And again, this idea that, well, private financing, that's one of the narratives which emerged a little bit later when people really didn't want to pay up. Private financing will take care of it. Private financing will follow. Private financing cannot lead. Governments have to lead. Multilateral development banks need to lead. And this is one of the big issues, I think, which a large part of the world is grappling with. Unfortunately, much of that world is not heard today because the global conversations are very one-sided.
There did seem to be some movement around the idea of reforming the Bretton Woods institutions, and that seemed to come during the conversation. Would you say that that's true? Were you heartened by that?
I would say it's something which needs to be done. I would defer to Dr. Anwar here. I'm not, let me put it politely. I think there's a lot of hard work ahead of us.
Yeah,
Right?
What would you add?
definitely. Definitely.
So one of your colleagues, Dr. Anwar, said that the world's failure to invest enough in fossil fuels before cleaner alternatives can fully meet today's energy needs is a recipe for disaster. So what should we be doing differently now?
Well, I think there's several things that need to be done. I think first of all is we need to work collectively. This is not a national issue, it's a global crisis. So continuing to work quickly, collectively is extremely important. I think at the same time, we need to move faster also. And I think part of it also is the climate justice that Dr. Jaishankar just spoke about. I think that is essential because various countries, you can't tell them because of climate, you can't also at the same time not develop the infrastructure, the sort of social mobility, economic mobility of your population because you missed the boat. I think this is totally unacceptable in various ways. I think from our emphasis, we have been trying to also be realistic while seeing that while we are all focused on sustainable energy, taking a larger part in the energy mix, we also understand, and I think this has been very clear in the last year or so, that there's a lot of Middle East region have a very solid, almost 15 years or more of believing in sustainable energy and the necessity of addressing climate. We've been the first country to buy into the Paris Accords. We have been at the same time we have been also at the same time the first country with the net zero results. We have invested heavily in solar. We have invested heavily in solar. We have various investments that show our trust in this course that we are taking. And we're, of course, looking forward to COP28. And what we want to do in COP28 is to try and get out with a lot of actionable results in that perspective.
Interesting. I'll let you recover from your cough. You all right? Okay. You said, I would love to hear a little bit more, Dr. Jaishankar, because we saw COP27, one of those places where India yet again is emerging as a pivotal country between the East and the West, the North and the South. And we've also seen that in the G20 as well. And there's been praise for the Indian delegation, the G20, working really hard to seek consensus between Moscow and the Western camp. And you've said yourself that the war in Ukraine is actually sucking up oxygen in Europe. I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about that. Give me that one.
Sorry about the cough. Look, I think we have two big divides today. One, you could say, is a kind of East-West divide, centering around Ukraine. One is a North-South divide, centering around development. And Ukraine is also having an impact on development. So I do believe a country like India can play that bridging role, not alone. I think UAE, for example, can, in a sense, has also been doing some of it. So would some other countries. But there is the need today to bridge. That's it.
Do you want to add to that, Dr. Anwar?
Yes, I think we all want to see a quick end to the conflict in Ukraine. And we all believe also that this conflict will not end except politically and through a political process. I think it is in our interest to make sure that there is a political process that ends this conflict. But I think also that, at least from the UAE's perspective, I think our position on the conflict in Ukraine has been a very principled position. I think from as a country our size in this region, I think we don't accept that conflict is resolved through military means, and at the same time we think that in this international system, sovereignty has to be protected and sovereignty has to be respected. But while we're saying that, the devices that need to be used are political devices. It should be political process that will resolve this. It should be a political process that will ensure that conditions following the end of conflict in Ukraine are not the sort of conditions that will bring about another conflict in a few years. I think only a political process is able to do that, to address the Ukraine issue, but at the same time ensure that grievances do not bring about another conflict out of the way that this thing has been resolved.
So let's talk a little bit more about technology. You've both mentioned the partnership between the UAE and India. Dr. Jaishankar, you've said recently that the rise of India will be deeply linked to the rise of Indian technology. And it is a tried and tested tool for spurring economic improvement. But technology nationalism can also be vaccine. So I wonder how you avoid technology nationalism while encouraging technology growth.
Well, again, I think the UAE has benefited from globalization and has benefited from a world that has been more of an open, competitive, trading and ideas actually platform. So really, we do look with concern at the sort of technology nationalism that you have spoken about. But we understand that at the root of these concerns is political issues. These are not, at the root, are not technological issues. They are national security issues, political issues. And I think we need to accept that while this sort of tension is in the international system, there will be a ripple effect. There will be a ripple effect on how we trade, there'll be a ripple effect on how we invest, there'll be a ripple effect on how we sort of work in technology, collaborating rather than always competing. This is a sort of world that we are moving into, following the sort of naivete of the early globalism. It's not a good place to be in, to be honest, but I think at the same time, there are political reasons, there are national security reasons. I think for us, a country our size, in our region, this is a tougher world to navigate. But that's the way it is, and we have to navigate it.
It's natural technology would be nationally used. So we that something has fundamentally changed. Oh, everything has fundamentally changed. Uh, there will be national competitions based on technological capabilities, different nations, different groupings of nations asserting their influence or dominance or whatever you call it. That's for real. That's the part which I said, the constant competition among nations. But there are some real issues out there. Globalization is going to make us work collaboratively because it's in our mutual interest. But if you come, say, to some parts, let's say digital technology, there's a real debate going on today about trust and transparency, about, are all countries, all companies, all providers the same? Does it matter to you under which law, regulation, ethos your data is residing? I think we can't run away from those issues. So if you ask me, will we see, in a sense, disputation, argumentation, maybe stronger in the technology world? Absolutely. I don't think it's a matter of prediction. I think it's already there. So we need to start taking positions.
And it's not just nation states that have a stake in this game either. It's companies as well, right? So let's talk for a moment about the technological hegemony of some of the big Western companies at the moment. Vaccines or tweets, a lot of the intellectual capital for technology innovation is controlled by some of these larger Western companies. And in fact, Dr. Jaishankar, I think you have over 2 million followers on Twitter. I wonder, in your world, in your better world, actually, what do global technology platforms look like?
Yeah, look, again, today you have tech companies. If you took their market cap and sort of put it up against the national economies of countries, I suspect some of them may qualify for a G20. Some of them
Would you welcome them?
Some of them are that big. So it's again, these are new issues that are emerging. And in the name of, as I said, narrative setting, political correctness, we can't keep ducking these issues. It does matter. For example, I'm giving you now an Indian perspective. do tech companies have the same rules when it comes to cooperating on, say, national security matters? Which countries would they respond to? Which governments would they respond to? Which would they not?
Where,
Different,
which countries should they respond to?
certainly countries like India. So I don't know who else. I presume they will respond to countries in there. But uh, you know, what is there? Everything else. I'm not saying everything in the world should be regulated, but there are accepted norms and practices and sort of operating ethos. So if really you have big enterprises which have monetized data through through their particular models, in the name of, shall I say, freedom, would you leave them completely to decide what they should be doing once they've reached that stage? I mean, there are some live controversies going on. I mean, I'm not getting into that, but you know that and I know that. So, so the idea that somewhere tech is neutral geopolitically, tech is neutral within societies, it's not true. They've not been. Think about it.
What does this look like from your perspective, Dr. Anwar?
Well, again, as I said, I mean, technology, number one, is a great wealth creator. I mean, huge wealth for countries, for companies, is being created for technology. I think at the same time, technology provides developmental leaps. Many countries, through technology, can actually create a 5 or 10-year leap because they are big on AI or big on this or that. So I think it's definitely not neutral, as Dr. Jaishankar said. I think from our perspective, I think what is important, the UAE, for example, this year, for the first time, hit or is hitting $500 billion in GDP. So we really understand this is our first time that we do hit this number, and for a country our size to have a GDP that size is quite extraordinary. But I think we understand also that to continue this sort of development, we need to invest in technology, we need to partner in technology and to navigate our way right now, along as what you were saying is more technology nationalism. But I think that's the way things are, and then we need to deal with it.
If I could just, in a sense, build further on what both of us said. Given the centrality of technology to our existence, to our businesses, to our progress, we are going to need to factor it in more and more, both in governance and in international relations. So again, I'm giving you the data side of it as an easy example. I think a lot of societies, I certainly would speak for mine, uh, today feel the need to be comfortable about trusted providers when it comes to an area like telecom. Okay. Similarly, there would be countries who would worry about cross-border data flows. You know, who's who's handling it. Now, companies are obviously crucial, but all companies, and all destinations and all societies are not the same. So we have to, we can't make it a kind of a theology that, companies are safe and the problem is with the countries. Companies are part of a country. I mean, countries don't run businesses, or at least most of them do. Some do. Uh, so, I think we are entering this domain where, if I were to say the next 10 years, the big arguments and mm, the big maneuverings are going to be around technology. It's going to be around data, it's going to be around chips, it's going to be around AI, it's going to be around space. I could give you more examples.
So that's interesting because you mentioned in your opening remarks the cooperation between the UAE and India around some of these emerging, these other areas like space, like AI. Tell me a little bit about how that partnership you think will help you individually as well as create this new kind of globalization.
Well, again, I would like to echo Dr. Jaishankar's enthusiasm really about the bilateral relationship. I think this gives me an opportunity to come and sort of reflect on what has been really a wonderful, wonderful trajectory of the bilateral relationship since 2015. What we have achieved in 7 years has been remarkable. And I think, Dr. Jaishankar did not perhaps mention this, but I think leadership, really Prime Minister Modi's leadership and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's leadership in this has been a major catalyst here.
I just thought everybody knew that.
Okay. But, to start with a historical relationship. And this is a relationship where we've always had the private sector ahead of the curve of government. I think right now, the government is giving the private sector a run in leading this relationship. And I think what has happened is incredible. I mean, since 2015, the milestones are just too many to sort of catalog, and they're all over. So what was really a good relationship, an excellent relationship, has become a strategic and fit for the future relationship, if I can describe it in that way. I mean, if you really think about it, SEPA, I was speaking to the Indian ambassador, Sanjay Sudhir, only last week, and he was telling me, we don't really have the official figures yet, but we are seeing about a 30% increase in trade following the signing of SEPA in February. And our target really is to reach trading levels of $100 billion with India. These are with India, $100 billion.
This year.
Yeah, $100 billion with India. So really, where can we get all that extra sort of revenue streams, so to speak, in the relationship? I think technology is one of the major things. I mean, we're doing things in space, we are doing things in oil, we are doing things in food security, you name it. It's really across the board. The UAE today, I think, is the 10th FDI player in India today, and I think this is quite significant. But I think the real added advantage is what we do on technology. If we are able to harness technology, make sure that we can work together in various areas of technology within our bilateral, and as I said, multilateral, smaller multilateral forums, I think you will see that the remarkable achievements of the past 7 years will really pale in front of what we are really seeing in a truly, truly promising relationship.
Interesting. We've run out of time. One final thought from you.
I give you two final thoughts. One, in this period when our relationship has been very strong, we've also discovered, for example, during COVID, how firmly we stood by each other, in terms of handling community, food supplies flowing, the cooperation we had on vaccines. So in a world where we are going to get more disruptions due to conflict or COVID or climate, whatever, the reliability today of relationship between India and UAE, I think sets it apart. That's my first point. The second point is, the UAE is following its transformational path. A lot of us here are familiar with it. India is doing its own. Now, it so happens that the two paths have the ability to support each other. And
can I just mention an anecdote, if you allow me? Again, during COVID, early COVID time, Dr. Jaishankar called our foreign minister, and he was responsible for the distribution of vaccines. And he called and said, you know, I'm looking and seeing that you have requested 200,000 vaccines from India. Are you sure this is all you want? We can give you 2 million if you want. And I think this sort of, you know, this touches you, because really I think what has really happened to this relationship is this reservoir of trust. I think the trust that underpins any relationship really makes you do wonderful things. And I think this is what we have been doing.
Thank you. That seems an appropriate moment to end this panel, or should we say press pause, because I can see that the collaboration will continue. We're going to break in a moment, but
attitude of cooperation, and I seek guidance of very senior members. One of them has spoken a while ago. Matters of urgent public importance. Shri V. Vijay Reddy.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. Chairman, sir, it is very important issue which I would like menace that is caused by the instant loan apps, sir. Sir, the modus operandi is to give instant loans. In fact, I also have been receiving so many messages very often that I have been sanctioned the loan of 2 lakhs, 5 lakhs, etc., etc. And through these mobile applications, and in the process, they gain access because they ask for the access to our data. They ask for the access to our data, whether sensitive messages, gallery, and then photos, videos, whatnot, everything from our mobile applications, sir. And the cycle of blackmailing and the extortion starts there, sir. Once they gain access to our mobile data, and if the borrower is forced to, in fact, what happens, sir? After the loan is availed and the amount is credited to our bank account and the repayment starts, where if the borrower fails to repay the amount or installment is not repaid promptly, then the borrower is forced to repay an amount is much, much higher than the loan amount, and which is very exorbitant, sir. If the borrower resists, what happens? He is threatened with dire consequences, with leaking of sensitive and personal information of the borrower. Sir, in fact, majority of the instant loan apps are being operated from China. It is not from India. And after all, the cases that are being booked on Indian citizens who are agents of these loan apps, sir, being operated from China. Sir, these loan apps engaged in finance business. It is nothing but lending the money. Any finance company engaged in the business of financing has to be registered with the Reserve Bank of India as an NBFC, which is not happening. So I want this to be taken note of by the Honorable Leader of the House, sir. Andhra Pradesh has witnessed so many cases of extortion and also blackmail to do the best of to address this issue, and so many cases have been registered, and then some of the persons have been arrested, and AP police worked central computer emergency response team, sir. And sir, finally my request is, I request the Honorable Minister to intervene and ban such apps. Number 2, punish the developers and promoters. Number 3, formulate stricter laws and regulations around the privacy of phone data, sir. Thank you very much.
Dr. V. Sivadasan.
Respected Chair, here to my question, the government has replied that related to the vacancies of the jobs. Unemployment is a very serious crisis in our country. Sir, it is a shocking around that 10 lakh posts are vacant in the ministries of the government departments itself. But in the last 5 years, only less than 2 lakh posts have been filled by the government. Sir, this is a shocking incident. That means less than 40,000 appointments per year. This is very less number of recruitment. Earlier, this government has replied to my question that the vacancies in railway is 2,26,000. Sir, in army, the government has replied 1,31,000 posts are vacant, and the huge number of vacancies in other posts also reported. Sir, in this recent reply of my question, the union government stated that in 23,000 posts are in vacancies in Group A category. Sir, 1,18,000 posts are vacancies in Group B category, and 8 lakh posts is vacant in C category, sir. 8 lakh posts are vacant in Group C category. See the huge number of vacancies in the government sector. Sir, the youngsters in the country is facing huge problems, various problems because of the unemployment. In IT sector, we are seeing a new crisis. The IT companies are reducing the salaries, and the terminations of employees reported in the various IT companies. Sir, the government of the country, they look in the matter very seriously, and I request the government fill up all vacancies as soon as possible. Otherwise, the youngsters in the country face huge other problems. So, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Shri Pavitra Margarita.
हेलो, नमस्कार सर। सभापति महोदय, बचपन से ही मेरा सार्वजनिक भाषण देने का थोड़ा बहुत आदत है, लेकिन पहली बार मैं जीवन में हिंदी में भाषण देने के लिए कोशिश कर रहा हूं, और मेरा मानना है कि मेरा मातृभाषा असमिया हो या अन्य भारतीय भाषा हो, इसी तरह हिंदी विश्व का एक अन्यतम श्रेष्ठ भाषा है। तो माननीय सभापति महोदय, आपका जरिए मैं सदन को ये बोलना चाहता हूँ बेहद खुशी से कि अगली साल 2023 में ही अपना असम चाय का 200 वर्ष पूरा होगी। वी आर कंप्लीटिंग 200 years, 200 वर्ष पूरा होगा, और असम वासी तथा असम का सरकार डॉक्टर हिमंत विश्व शर्मा के नेतृत्व में ये जो 200 साल का ये उत्सव हम मनाएंगे। मेरा निवेदन है कि भारत सरकार भी असम को सहायता करे कि भारत सहित विश्व का अन्य प्रांत में भी ये माना जाए, और प्रचार के लिए, प्रसार के लिए। और दूसरे मेरा बात यह है कि चाय को नेशनल ड्रिंक हिसाब से घोषणा किया जाए, क्योंकि कन्याकुमारी से कश्मीर तक, गुजरात से उत्तर पूर्वी तक हर घर की रसोई में, माँ का रसोई में एक चीज मिलता है, व्यवहार सर्विस रूज होता है, वो है चाय। और हम सब लोग देश भर की हर